Alright guys, in this video I'm going to go over some of the concepts that as a class we seem to find the most difficult on the Unit 2 test. And then at the end of this video, as long as you make it through, you'll be given the password if you would like to retake the test. So starting off, by far the most difficult question on the test, I think, was this one about what type of natural selection or what type of selection is illustrated by these two graphs. And then in the question you get two graphs, and you get something that looks like this, and then you get one of kind of these three graphs. And so what you need to know is that there's three types of natural selection, right? Natural selection is kind of like the category, like the broad category. Natural selection. And then there's three different types of natural selection. There's stabilizing, there's directional, and there's disrupting. Disrupting. So three types of natural selection: stabilizing, directional, and disrupting. Now right here, this graph, we'll just call this number 1. Alright, this graph is just a graph, and it doesn't really matter. These are a population of butterfly though, and we can see that this would be like color of the butterfly, and most of them, and this would be like the amount of individuals, so the number of individuals, so most of them have like green, greenish, yellowish, slightly bluish colors to the butterflies. And then we have the graphs of three different types of natural selection over here. So now this first one would be stabilizing. Stabilizing is when there's a spike or an increase in what we'd call the average trait, the one right in the middle, right? So green is right in the middle on the two extremes. The extremes would be really red or really blue. Green and yellow are right in the middle. They're the average trait. And so that's stabilizing natural selection. We see we had a little bit at yellow and green here at the beginning, and then we move, there's a lot more green and yellow right here. So stabilizing is when we move towards the average trait, or the trait in the middle. And this could be because maybe predators are really good at finding red and blue butterflies, and so all the red and blue butterflies die, and then the green ones get to reproduce, and so there's a lot more green ones. The second one is directional. Directional natural selection, or directional selection. And this one, you can see we move from the average, or the middle trait, over to one of the extremes. Now it could go either way. In this example, you see we went to the red extreme, but we could have also gone to the blue extreme. The important thing to remember, in directional, it only moves one direction. So it either goes to the red or the blue. It does not go to both. It chooses a direction, just like it sounds, direction. It chooses a direction, and then it goes in that direction. And so here maybe the predators are really good at eating blue, and they're kind of okay at finding green butterflies, and they're not good at finding red butterflies, and so most of the red butterflies survive and they reproduce, and we get lots of red butterflies. And this last one is called disrupting. Disrupting, or disruptive. Sometimes it's called disruptive. It's called disruptive. And in this one, we go away. Remember, we start here. We're always starting at this one in the upper left corner. We go away from the average trait, and we go to both extremes, so red and blue, right? In directional, we went to one extreme. In disruptive, we go to both extremes. And so maybe in this one, the predator's really good at finding green and yellow butterflies, but it's not good at seeing blue and red butterflies, and so there's lots of blue and red butterflies, and they reproduce, and we get a lot more of them. Okay, so knowing the difference between those different types, being able to recognize the graphs is what you'll need to do on the test. Next question we had that seemed to be difficult for quite a few people was the question on radiometric dating. And so it said, how does radiometric dating help scientists pinpoint the age of a fossil. And so what radiometric dating does is that it shows the rate of decay of the radioactive material that's present in the object, and then scientists can use that to determine how old the fossil is. And so a lot of times how they do it, if we find a bone, here's our bone, and then maybe here's our bone that they've found. Okay, so they've found this bone. And what scientists will do, they'll find a radioactive material in this bone, and a lot of times is carbon-14. So you'll see like carbon-14 dating. Maybe you've heard of that before. And so what happens, carbon-14 will decay. It will change into like carbon-12. And so scientists can find a fossil, and they can measure the amount of carbon-14 that's present in the fossil. And since scientists know how long it takes for C14 to go to C12, if they know how much C14 is in a fossil, then they can use that to determine how old the fossil is. Okay, so scientists use the rate of decay of some radioactive material, a lot of times it's carbon-14, and then they can use that to determine how old the fossil is. Okay, next one I want to go over was the question on the Hardy-Weinberg Principle. And you learned two Hardy-Weinberg equations in the course, and the one that you really need to know and understand for the test is this one, P plus Q equals 1. And so P plus Q should equal 1, where P equals the dominant allele, and Q generally equals the recessive allele. And that's just the frequency of the dominant and recessive allele in a population. And it has to be in decimal form, which makes sense because they both add together to equal 1, so they both must be less than 1. And so for an example, let's say we have green and yellow frogs, and if we have maybe green is dominant and yellow is recessive, and let's say the alleles in our population, let's say 70% of them are green, so we'd write that as 0.7, and 30% of them are yellow, we'd write that as 0.3, right? That's percentage in decimal form. And so then if we put that in there, we'd have 0.7 plus 0.3, and that would equal 1, and so a Hardy-Weinberg equation would work. And so the question that you're asked is that if P and Q are unchanging in a population, the population is an equilibrium, what type of population does this scenario represent? So if P and Q are unchanging, means it's an equilibrium. What does that actually mean with the allele frequencies? So if P and Q are unchanging, then clearly it's a population with constant allele frequencies, right? These are unchanging, and that's what these are. These are frequency of the green allele is 70%. The frequency of the yellow allele is 30%. And so if they're not changing, then the population has constant allele frequencies, right? They're not changing, they're constant. And one last one I want to mention real quick, and I think this was a quiz question early in the unit. It's about populations. So it's the population of white-tailed deer inhabits a certain patch of forest in Michigan. Which alleles can be considered the gene pool of those deer? And remember, gene pool means that it's the alleles of a species in a population. So if we have a bunch of deer, let's say each individual circle's a deer, right, in this specific patch of forest. Here's our patch of forest, right? Now let's say, that's in Michigan. Now there's deer in a lot of other states too, right? So, but they're all separated by a long distance. So here's some more. Here's another population of deer. Here's another one. Here's another one. All right, so we have all these populations of deer. But if we want, what group of alleles can be considered the gene pool of those deer? It's specific to their population only. So it's not all the white-tailed deer, right? It's just those in a specific population. All right. So remember, guys, remember these things, especially there's a couple of questions that were tough about selection up here. So make sure you understand the differences between these types of selections. Stabilizing, the more common or the average or the medium trait increases. Directional, we go from, remember we're always starting with the one on the upper left, we go from the most common or average trait to one of the extremes. And then in disruptive or disrupting, we go from the common or average medium trait to both extremes. All right, guys, hope that helped. And you can get the password and retake the test if you would like.